And we're live. Please, audience, welcome Abby LeMaster. She'll be sharing her personal journey from information systems to AAA game production. She's now working as a lead gameplay producer at Riot Games, but in the end, she's just Abby. So please, let's start.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I think everybody can hear me okay, hopefully. If not, somebody please let me know somewhere. But what a lovely program. Thank you all so much for coming. I am so thrilled to be here, spending time with all of you. And also, let's give a really big end of the day shout out to our wonderful organizers who are working so hard behind the scenes to make Games Gathering a reality. Dziękuję. Hopefully I said that correctly. Today, I'm going to talk to you about my journey transitioning from a career of information systems management to one in AAA game production. I'll talk all about the strategies that I used to stand out in the job market, the kind of work I did once I entered the industry, and also the various production practices I use on a daily basis in my role. And just for context setting and clarity, the first half of my presentation is very self-indulgent. It is all about me, but I will be talking a lot about production practices as well. So hope you stick around. So thank you. My name is Abby LeMaster. Currently, I'm the lead gameplay producer on Legends of Runeterra for Riot Games. I am also a speaker, a Women in Games ambassador, a mentor with the International Game Developers Association, and an honoree of Forbes 30 Under 30. I also do freelance commercial production gigs occasionally for clients like Tony Hawk and PGA and MasterCard. And formerly, I worked in production at PlayStation Studios Visual Arts. And before all of that stuff, I worked in IT as an analyst and also as a network technician after I got my major in management of information systems. So in addition to Legends of Runeterra, the games I've worked on include God of War Ragnarok, The Last of Us franchise, the Spider-Man franchise, Ratchet & Clank, MLB The Show 21, Death Stranding, and also Helldivers 2, which released just a couple of weeks ago and is my friends are playing it a lot, which is very exciting to see. So the first part of this conversation is, oops, I live here now. So I kind of accidentally got into IT, and that's not a bad thing. I really liked the stuff I was doing, but to get more into it and how I ended up there, I was really into Dragon Age when I was a kid. And when I was a freshman in college, Dragon Age Inquisition was just coming out. And I was like, oh my gosh, I need to play this game. And I had just gotten an Xbox One, and I remember I was having some issues connecting to the school internet because I was living in a dorm. And because of the way the new Xbox One was set up, it actually never was able to connect to the internet. And I was stuck in this infinite loop of trying to authenticate to the server, but I wasn't able to do it. So I got really frustrated because I wanted to play my game, and I ended up spoofing my Xbox onto my computer at the time. And after I spoofed the MAC address and authenticated through the system, everything worked. I was really excited. I unspoofed it, and I got to playing Dragon Age, which was really exciting. I was very proud. And this is my actual triumphant selfie several years ago after figuring out how to get it done. And that is like my roommate's cat, and Dragon Age is playing in the background. And then I ended up getting a letter in the mail from our network services team because, again, I lived on campus. And they said, you violated our terms of service for using the internet. There is a fine. It will be a couple $100s. So you can either pay the fine or you can come and talk to us so we can ask questions about why you did it, etc. So I was a college student, which meant I was pretty broke. And so I elected to go and talk to them. And I told them exactly what I did. And I said, I promise I was just trying to play Dragon Age. I wasn't doing anything nasty. I just, I had to go play my game. And they laughed and I laughed. And at the end of the day, I ended up leaving with a job offer to join their network services team. And that was my first foray into IT. And I eventually ended up staying in IT and continued working in it. And eventually it just made sense for me to major in it as well. So those are my parents right there. Spoiler alert, my parents still have no idea what I do for a job, but they're really excited that I'm having a good time. So the kinds of things I did when I was working in information systems, I was a network technician, as I mentioned, at San Diego State University. And what that meant was I managed and maintained our enterprise network. So there were a lot of switches and there were a lot of routers and access points, and we maintained a daily traffic of about 7,000 users. And what I was doing was pretty manual. I was pulling Cat5 Ethernet cables through the walls, I was cutting them to size, and I was replacing damaged hardwired Ethernet ports. I was also assigning static IPs and domains. I was installing access points, and I was also configuring and installing Cisco and Alcatel-Lucent switches, which I don't know if it's still this, but those were like the big names at the time for network switches. And overall, I was monitoring and I was maintaining the overall health of SDSU's wireless internet system. And then eventually I moved over to our San Diego County library system, and I became an IT specialist, which is very similar to an analyst. And at that point in time, I was doing a little bit less manual labor at that point. We had something called an IT outsourcer, and I was the technical liaison between my department and that company, which at the time was Hewlett-Packard. And they would take care of most of the stuff that I was doing previously at my other job. I ended up collaborating with our outsourcer on our public image, our profile designs, and our group security policies. And if you've ever onboarded to a new company and you're missing access permissions or things like that, that was the kind of thing that I was coordinating and setting up on the back end. And I also negotiated with our outsourcer to purchase 3D printers on behalf of the library system. And then I developed and I published training materials to educate the staff at all of our different branches. And to put it in perspective, in California, San Diego is a very huge county, and we had 33 different branches all over the county. So it was a very large surface area that we were covering. And I also led a committee that researched, purchased, and distributed educational tablets to children in our local communities to help raise early literacy levels. And that was all well and good, and the work was okay, but it wasn't necessarily fulfilling. And as I was nearing graduation, I realized that I was pretty profoundly unhappy with the kind of work that I was doing. It was stuff that I knew how to do, and it was stuff that I had gone to school for, and I could see the value in everything that I was doing, but it wasn't really fitting like a glove. And you spend so much of your life at your job, and I was just realizing it wasn't really that fun for me. I was realizing I didn't really have the autonomy that I wanted. I didn't really have the ability to be expressive creatively. And I wasn't surrounded by problems I found interesting. And as I was getting closer to graduation, I really started to realize I needed to figure out where the fun in my life was going to be. And that led me to this question: what are you doing when you're going home? And for me, I was playing video games. I was going home and I was playing Mass Effect and I was playing Gears of War, and I was taking pictures next to Lego Master Chief in New York City. And I just really liked games, and that's what I was doing in my downtime. That's where all of my friends were, and that's where all of my interests lie. And that was what was also giving me like enjoyment in my personal life. The idea actually to jump into video games didn't actually form, though, until a friend of mine asked me to review his application for an engineering internship at PlayStation when we were both in college. And then that got me starting to think. So I was helping my friend out, and I realized that the internship he was applying for was in San Diego, which was where I lived. And that was really exciting. And I'm not an engineer by any means, so I wasn't going to apply for any engineering internships, but maybe there were some other roles that I could look for. And then I started looking at all of the other things that were available for PlayStation, and I found a production group internship. And something about that was really electrifying, and I got really excited. And as I was reading through everything in the job description, I knew that I could hit every single one of their bullet points if I could just get an interview. So I focused on doing that. I focused on my cover letter, and I knew that I didn't have the game experience that they were typically looking for. Because I realized at this point, like, some people can go to school for games now, which is insane to me. And at the time, I didn't even realize that majoring in video games was an option. So I was really feeling behind from the get-go. So instead, I focused my cover letter on the things that I felt could be transferable from my experience in information technology to a game production role. I talked about how I'd begun to build a career on enhancing company processes and engaging my communities through my knowledge of information systems, and how I understood just how fundamental each part of the process can affect a large enterprise corporation, all the way from the beginning to the end of a pipeline. I talked about our work with our outsourcing partners at San Diego County Library, and how, as a student worker, I had developed the business acumen to negotiate with our outsourcer to enhance our technology and our programming. And I talked about how I had led committees dedicated to introducing more programming aimed at children through educational tablets you could check in and check out. And I worked with IT on our security policies. I maintained our SharePoint environments, and I had negotiated with our outsourcer and our department directors and executives to purchase 3D printers for each one of our 33 branches. And so while I didn't have experience in games per se, I was able to demonstrate my willingness to lead others, to figure out solutions, and to bring large groups of individuals into a gradual consensus, which, as I was later finding out, was essentially the job of a video game producer. And also, I made sure to talk about my love of games because it was a video game job. I talked about how the PlayStation 1 was my very first console, and how some of my earliest childhood memories involved playing a game called Star Wars Jedi Power Battles with my dad when I was barely old enough to press all of the controller buttons by myself. And I talked about the games that I'd played that had made a lasting impact on me. And I leaned into the emotional storytelling that my background just playing games with my friends provided, in addition to all of the experience that I had just demonstrated from my time in information technology. And I'm really happy to say that it worked. I passed all of the interviews, which was really great because in my single-minded focus, I had no alternatives. And I don't recommend that, but I was really excited. And I did the internship, and it was amazing. And before I talk about that specifically, let's talk a little bit more about game development as a whole. So, okay, I'm here now. Now what? What goes into a game? And so everybody that contributes to a game, let's go ahead and call them individual contributors. They can be in any one of these disciplines here. And the fact of the matter is, I am most assuredly missing several disciplines. So if you work in games and you're seeing this and you're like, my stuff isn't in there, I'm so sorry. There are just so many to choose from. But the part that I'm going to talk to you the most about, because it's my area of expertise, is being a producer, being in production. So imagine, instead of a game, that we're building a brick wall, and each individuals in these disciplines are just one brick that makes up that wall. Producers are essentially the mortar that holds all of those bricks together, and they make sure that they can stand up by themselves, that they can lean on each other, and that they can form a united front. And also, hopefully, the bricks are all talking to each other. And at the end of the day, hopefully, the brick ships a title because that's the end goal. It's a weird analogy, but I do get asked a lot what producers essentially do because it can vary depending on which studio you're working at. But essentially, we're doing budget and resource allocation. We're doing timeline and milestone management. We're performing risk assessments to make sure that we're shipping everything on time. And we're collaborating with creative teams. We're also making sure that those teams are collaborating with each other. And we're also quality owners. We're the ones who gate the content going into the final build. We are team leadership and we support team leadership. And we're responsible for post-release support and learnings as well, which, as an example, after we ship something or a discrete piece of work to players, we'll do something called a retroactive or a post-mortem where we'll talk about the things that either went well or didn't go so well and what kind of discussions we feel like we need to have as a team. So if we did the same exact thing over again, how can we do it even better? And that's also a lot of stuff to keep in mind. So it's a lot easier if you distill it into these 3 main points. We make sure your project finishes on time, on budget, and with a happy crew. And literally, it's just those 3 things. And if you keep those points as your North Star for reference, it's easier to understand our role on a project and how we can elevate it. To be successful at your job as a producer, you need to be comfortable wearing many different hats, and you need to be comfortable balancing the creative vision with the strategic planning and achieving consensus and commitment from your teams. And last but certainly not least, there are so many producers on a game. It's not just one, and each one has a different area of responsibility and depth and breadth of influence. So you can see when you're starting out at the bottom, you're a coordinator or an associate producer, and you're focusing more on the execution of tasks. Are people getting their stuff in on time? Are they submitting their reports? Are they moving tickets through the system in a way where we can reliably track velocity and make predictions? And then as you move up in the hierarchy, you start focusing more on systems. Do our systems of processes interact with each other in a way that is sustainable and healthy and gives us a good return on investment for the amount of effort that we're putting in? Is the core dev team causing our partner teams undue thrash? Is the localization pipeline resilient enough to handle last-minute changes? And how does my discipline interact with your discipline? And what is the net value we're trying to get out of that interaction? And the further up you go, you can become an executive producer, and that's more of like controlling the vision. And you're making sure that the teams everywhere, all over the project, are aligned on the kind of thing that they're making and that they understand what the vision for the game is. So for example, if the executive producer decides they want a cartoony game, someone at the execution or the IC level isn't making a gritty, realistic one. And the EP also advocates for the team's needs with their executive stakeholders and investors, and they shield the overall team from the higher level conversations that could affect their day-to-day. So to be super clear, I didn't know any of that. It is a lot of information. I promise I didn't know a single thing. I was just so excited and I was so happy to be there. And also, I knew I wanted to stay. As soon as I was in, I couldn't imagine a different career. So I get there and I'm an intern and I'm placed on a pretty tough project right away as part of the production team for Death Stranding. And specifically, I was a piece of the puzzle in their environment art outsourcing department, where my team was managing about 10 different global vendors on the creation of environment art assets for the game. And we were also crunching. And for context, Death Stranding is this massive, if you don't know what it is, Death Stranding is this massive AAA game made by a really fantastic game developer named Hideo Kojima. It was his first new game at his new studio, Kojima Productions, and he had already recruited such amazing talent in the form of Mads Mikkelsen, Norman Reedus, Lea Seydoux, Guillermo del Toro, etc. And there were a lot of eyes on this game, both internally and externally. And we really wanted our contributions to shine. So it was, for me, it was definitely like a dream first project. So there were some immediate challenges right away going into the internship. Information overload was definitely one. I was figuring out what my role was. I was learning what other people's roles were. I was learning about the project, and I was learning tools that I had never used before, like Perforce and Handsoft and some bespoke internal vendor tools that we used. I was also pretty scared to ask questions. I was really afraid that it would make me seem weak and like I didn't know what I was doing. Also, most of my coworkers were men. There were no women in my vertical org, and so sometimes in meetings, I would feel like the odd one out. I also had lots of imposter syndrome, and I was going around to myself thinking, oh my God, this is so cool, but do I even belong here? I don't know what I'm doing. I didn't go to school for this. Surely somebody somewhere has made a mistake, and I am just trying to get by. And then also not helping the imposter syndrome. Everyone on my team was so much more senior to me, and I was really intimidated just in general by everybody and the amount of knowledge and experience they had in their several combined years in the industry. There were no other production group interns in my specific studio, so I kind of felt a little bit spooked. And then, of course, the project had its own challenges, which every project does. We were understaffed on the production side. We had had some staffing changes. We had another person who was about to go on maternity leave. And I was just a brand new intern coming in, trying to figure everything out. We also had a massive volume of work. We were basically tasked to create a couple hundred assets, or maybe it was over 1,000. It's been a really long time, so I don't remember the final count, but it was a lot. And we also had communication challenges. Death Stranding is made by Kojima Productions, who are based in Japan, and they speak Japanese. So a lot of our feedback for our assets would come in Japanese, and we would then need to translate it to English. And then we had to make sure that we were disseminating the feedback effectively to our international vendors who were from China and India and Malaysia, who would then have to translate it back into their native languages and action on that feedback. And that was the longest game of telephone that you could imagine. We also had a very high quality bar. So you saw the pictures in the last slide. This game was very photorealistic. It was very beautiful. And the environments we knew had to be perfect because that was the essentially the game was walking around and interacting with these environments. And on top of everything else, we were crunching. We had some pretty strict deadlines that our studio had to adhere to in order to hit all of our milestones. We had to make sure that things were getting out on time so that we weren't blocking our client at the end of the pipeline. And on top of all of those things, my internship was only 3 months long, and there wasn't any kind of guarantee of an extension. But I knew right away, I was like, oh my goodness, I need to stay here. This is the best thing that has ever happened to me. I can't go back to IT after that. So right away, I knew that I needed to start brainstorming some solutions. And a thing that kept coming back to me was this quote of my dad's. So my dad had said, I may not be the smartest person in the room, but nobody will work harder than me. And I really took that to heart. I got in early and I stayed late. I found people who seemed both non-threatening and also really good at their jobs. And I inserted myself into their circles. And also, I asked so many questions until they basically got tired of me. And I carried a notebook with me everywhere I went, and I circled back with my manager almost daily. I also made sure I was highly, highly visible. I would volunteer to give our updates in team meetings, to run with solutions, and otherwise insert myself into any group situation that I could so I could provide value to my team. And also, I essentially became a yes person. Anything that seemed monotonous or otherwise unfun to do, I did it. So, in addition to doing regular production stuff, which was my job, I also made sure that our teams were fed. I made them birthday cards and I made them going away cards. And I got really good at rallying people to work overtime and ordering food, which wasn't a task that anybody else really wanted to pick up. And I was just like, oh my gosh, definitely, I will do that. Please let me take that off of your plate. Please let me help. And the important thing to note here is at no point did I ever feel like, oh man, I have to do this. It was always, oh wow, I get to. And that shift in mindset is so important. The imposter syndrome never fully went away, but my willingness to work hard and think of every question that I could and take advantage of the, oh, I'm new mindset really made me stand out. And at the end of the internship, they actually made the decision to bring me on, which I was really excited about. So it's important to know there are some pretty big pockets of games and also movies and VFX and many things related to the entertainment industry, which is essentially a gig economy. And what a gig economy means is that you kind of end up going from project to project as a contractor. At some places, especially right now with the way the economy is, full-time employment opportunities aren't always available right away. And sometimes it's easier to just get your foot in the door as a contractor and get as much experience as you can on your resume and leverage that to become a full-time employee later on down the road. And also, some people enjoy being contractors. Some people want the stability of full-time employment. It really depends on you and your goals and what feels most authentic to you and your lifestyle. So I was brought on, but I was brought on as a contractor. And there were quite a few differences I had to learn rather quickly because it was really like my first big adult job. There was no PTO, so I didn't get any paid time off, and I only got 3 sick days, which I had to use sparingly. And again, this is in the United States. I don't know how it is, how contracts positions work in other countries. I had no PlayStation covered health, dental, or vision insurance. I had no retirement account or any kind of company match. I couldn't participate in our employee assistance program. And there were no employee discounts because I wasn't an employee. I also had no education reimbursement. So if I had decided that I wanted to go back to school so I could be better at my job, I would be responsible for that myself. And there were also no annual performance evaluations, compensation reviews, profit sharing, or bonuses. And so all of that sounds like a lot, but thankfully the pros outweighed the cons, at least at that point in my life. And again, it changes depending on the season of your life that you're in. So for me, I was in the game industry, which was a lifelong dream, and I was so excited. And I also knew that one day I could be a full-time employee. So over the next several years, I did a lot of different things. After Death Stranding, I moved to The Last of Us Part 2, which was my first time working with animators and technical artists. And I learned everything that I could about motion capture, about rigging, about blend shapes and Maya, and most importantly, how to produce a team of over 100 people, all of whom were at various skill levels and brought different personalities to the table. I learned how to move entire creative scenes through a very technical animation pipeline and how to communicate with a client, Naughty Dog, who was known for their very intense, very critical eye for detail. I also tracked data points that helped inform the veracity of our estimations when new scenes came in. And when we started crunching, I was one of the first people in and also one of the first people to leave. And then after The Last of Us Part 2 was done, I went to a lot of other projects that needed me, projects like Spider-Man and projects like Ratchet and Clank. And I worked with our environment artists and our vendors again, and we shipped thousands of assets during the brunt of the COVID-19 pandemic. And then eventually I was placed on what would be my last title at PlayStation Studios, which was the cinematic animation and technical art pipeline for God of War Ragnarok. And the next part of this is a little bit of the heavy part, because this is getting to the crux of why I feel this talk is important and why I feel so motivated to share my story with everybody. And I'm going to take a quick sip of coffee real quick. 1 second. Okay. So I was doing everything that I loved, but I was feeling really frustrated. At that point in time, I had spent about 4 years as a contractor. So that's about 4 years without PTO. That's 4 years without benefits. And that's 4 years without a structured performance review. Vertical movement wasn't really available at that time, as I would later find out. And I hadn't had any change in compensation since the internship ended. And also, full-time employment opportunities were still so very far away. And also, I was having to rely more and more on overtime to combat inflation when I felt like my salary should be keeping up with the times. And I don't know if you remember how bad the inflation got during COVID, which I think is pretty hard to forget. But in the United States, it got pretty insane. In the US, it had gotten up to I think it was around 11 or 12%. And I had been talking to my manager about it, and it didn't seem like there was anything that we could potentially do about that. So in one weekend of July of 2021, I made up my mind and I decided to peek over the fence and see what else was out there. But also leaving was very scary. I had no idea of what life outside of PlayStation even looked like. I didn't know a whole lot about my own industry other than my specific studio. And that essentially tied my own hands together, or I essentially tied my own hands together by not embracing this community of game developers that was just on the other side of the door. And I really loved all of the projects that I was working on. I loved God of War. I loved The Last of Us. I loved everything that I got to work on. And most importantly, I really enjoyed working with all of the teams that I was working with. And also, I felt like I was feeling some shame at not getting a full-time position at PlayStation after so long. And it felt like I was doing something wrong, even though a lot of it does end up being environmental. And it was really hard not to take all of that personally. And then I started spiraling a little bit. I started thinking to myself, oh no, what if I'm making the wrong decision? What if nobody hired me? And then who in the world could I even talk to about this that wasn't at my studio? And eventually I came to a solution that might seem obvious to everybody in this room right now, but it took me an embarrassingly long time to figure this out. So this comes to a pretty important part of my conversation. And if anybody takes anything out of this talk, please take this. You need to find a mentor and you need to hold them close because they can change your life. It taught me that a lot of things that seem insurmountable aren't, but we become paralyzed by our own mindsets. And finding the right mentor or just being vulnerable or open with others in your position or even adjacent to it, it can change the entire trajectory of your career. And then you learn that you're not alone. And having mentors taught me so much. Some of the most important lessons I've learned is knowing your value and making sure that other people know it too. And that stumbling and failure is the essence of momentum. If you've ever studied game design, you know about failing fast so that you can get more information. And all of that is so important. And that we should combat stereotypes with beautiful stories. And we should build long-lasting and supportive relationships with the people in our network and beyond. And also, and this is like one of the most important things that I really want to emphasize, the more powerful you are, the faster you can make things happen. And I think there's a stigma against people, especially women, wanting to be powerful in their industries. But if you have good intentions and you're using that power to uplift others and to make the lives for the people around you better, Why shouldn't you want that? And most importantly, we need to build bridges so that more people can get here. And if they can't get there, we need to go get them and we need to bring them across. And so I learned about all of these things like very later in my career, but these are all things that are really important and that I have learned by finding mentors, and I hope you all take into account as well. So as I was in the middle of making my decision, I ended up talking to a man named Christopher Field, and I believe he's currently a senior producer at Crystal Dynamics. And I had known him personally through a martial art that he and I had both done for several years called Aikido, which is very fun. It's really exciting. But I ended up sending him a message on LinkedIn, and I ended up setting up some time for us to chat. And thankfully for me, he accepted, and we did that, and it was really easy. So we spoke about compensation. And it was the first real discussion that I had had with anybody about wage equity. And we also talked about his journey in the game industry, which admittedly was the first time that I had really and truly asked anybody outside of my studio what it was like for them. And that conversation, as quick as it was, I think it was only an hour, it taught me so much because my entire career changed because of that conversation. And I have him to thank. And one of the things that he said that I really took out of it, and again, is, sorry, my cats are here this morning and they have the zoomies. It's like 7:30 over here. One of the things that Chris taught me that is very important, and I hope you all take out of it too, is that nobody will care about your career as much as you do. Even if you have a great boss, you are the architect of your own fate. So people can help you and they can support you along the way. But at the end of the day, you're the one that is driving the change. You're the one that's connecting with people on LinkedIn. You're the one who's signing up for classes. You're the one responsible for making yourself better. And you can't afford to wait for opportunities to come to you. So after that conversation, I got to work. I didn't know exactly what I needed to do, but I'm a producer and we use spreadsheets. So I made a spreadsheet. This one was called The Hunt. And also, please note, this was an actual spreadsheet that I used. It's from 2021. The salary ranges in there were my estimates. It was made before California had made it mandatory for companies to post their pay scales. And also for your context, because I know currency is different in so many different parts of the world, I was making about $27 an hour, or about $56,000 a year annually without overtime. So for context, in California, one person would need to make about $76,000 to live comfortably in a city like San Diego. So I lived with a roommate, and I was one hospital bill away from being in very serious debt. So this was a matter of survival for me as well. So I kept working. As I was interviewing, I recorded my answers and I graded myself after how well I did or how well I presented myself, how I answered specific questions. For privacy's sake, I only ever recorded my half of the interviews. Please never record anybody else without their consent. I also created a redacted portfolio of my work and I shared it in those interviews. So producers naturally don't have a whole lot to show in terms of portfolios. Here is my cat. She would like to say hi to everybody. But because most of our stuff is in spreadsheets is why we don't have portfolios. But I had made some pretty interesting spreadsheets that I was really excited about. So I collected all of them and I redacted them and I made a choose your own adventure portfolio on a Miro board that reflected my proficiencies in automation and data management, asset tracking, team health, etc. And I shared that with all of my hiring managers so that it would be an interactive part of our interview experience together. And I researched everyone that was on my interview panels to know that what I was getting into. And if someone on my panel had gone to school at my university, or if we had some kind of shared connection, no matter how small, I would mention it pretty early on in the interview to try and build a bridge and break the ice, because you want to build that relationship very early. Every answer that I gave, I related back to each company's main values. And then I also use something called the STAR method, which means situation, task, action, and result, which is a way that you can tell a story to make it more digestible to people listening. And so that helped a lot for interviews as well. And it paid off. I eventually got a role a couple of months later, which was very fast, considering how slow the industry can move sometimes. And it is really important to note, especially right now, that the game industry ebbs and it flows. And I think a lot of my immediate success had a lot to do with the timing of my applications, in addition to all of the work that I was putting in. So if you're finding yourself in a similar position right now, especially in this environment that we're in, where we've had, I think the count that I'm seeing right now is 17,000 layoffs we've had since 2023. You are in a much harder environment than I was when I was doing this, and I wish you the best of luck. I became a gameplay producer on Legends of Runeterra, and right away I found that I finally had a network of people and mentors that would help me realize just how much potential I had. And for the first time, I started to feel powerful. I dug into some strengths and I got rid of others that had served me at different times in my career. And in the presence of dedicated mentorship and a more livable salary, I started to open up. I started to figure out who I was in the early stages of my career. And that also led me to realize I really like helping people and I want to help them understand these things that seem so simple, but I didn't know them. And because I didn't know them, I might have made some very different choices early on in my career. So I started doing a lot of mentoring. And I mentored a lot. I've spent hundreds of hours meeting with schools, individuals, and mentees through multiple different associations over the last couple of years. And then I started speaking up for diversity and equity and inclusion, because even with everything, I was still very often the only woman in the room. And then over time, I realized that people actually cared about what I had to say. And then I was offered more opportunities to speak and connect with people in my same spheres, with people who care about the same things that I do. And that was really enlightening. And it was so awesome, because building those kinds of relationships can be such a hard and frightening and daunting task. And as I leaned into my strengths, more people started to take notice. I was promoted twice in 2 years and eventually became the lead gameplay producer for Legends of Runeterra, which was a role that was previously held by those who had so much more experience than I did. And I helped solve some of our toughest challenges and guided the team as we shipped so much content and so many expansions to our players. And then things kept happening. I was given the honor of being listed on the Forbes 30 Under 30, which unlocked even more community for me to lean on for mentorship and for guidance. Mentorship and guidance that I hope I can prove myself worthy of by giving it back to others in my community. And now I travel internationally and I share my story. So I'm talking here today, but then I'm traveling to Lisbon next month, and then the Czech Republic after that, and hopefully many more places after that. My story isn't over, but it might have looked a lot different if I had taken literally any other fork in the road, if I hadn't pursued my passions, if I hadn't strategized, and if I hadn't found the right mentors to guide me along the way. And as we're wrapping up, I'm reminded of the collective experiences we've shared and all the lessons that we've all learned. And each story and each obstacle and each triumph has brought us to this moment collectively. And we're united by our passion for growth and our commitment to making a difference in our industry. And as you reflect on the challenges that you've faced and the milestones that you've achieved, I encourage you to embrace the power of resilience and resourcefulness and celebrate all of the wins that you've had leading up to this point. Your journey is going to be filled with twists, and it's going to be filled with turns and setbacks. But every setback is also an opportunity for growth, and every success that you have is a testament to your own dedication and perseverance. So as we're moving forward, please remember the importance of community and mentorship. Seek out allies that lift you up and be a source of support for those around you. because I know together we can create a more inclusive and equitable industry where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. And to all of you listening, I hope I can leave you with this. Please believe in yourself, trust in your abilities, and never, ever, ever underestimate the impact that you can make just as a single individual in this giant industry that we have. Your journey is just beginning. And thank you so, so much for allowing me to share a little bit of space with you, especially at the end of such a long day I'm sure you've had. And I really hope that your futures are filled with success and growth and fulfillment. Thank you so, so much for having me, Jaku. And I was also asked to remind you to please use the app if you have any questions. I'm here for the next 15 minutes, and I'm just really excited to chat with everybody. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Abby, for sharing your experience. We already have some questions, so let's start with the first one. Do you have any rituals that start your day?
Yeah. When you're saying rituals, I'm assuming work-related rituals, because that's what we call it in Agile project management. We'll have like daily stand-up. That's usually about 15 minutes, and then we go into like bug triage for the rest of the day, or not the rest of the day, and then taking on like various different development tasks. If we're talking about my personal rituals when I'm starting the day, it's usually waking up a little bit late, drinking a little bit too much coffee, and spending a lot of time with my cats in the morning, trying to get their zoomies out before the morning meetings.
Thank you. The second question is, have you suffered burnout and how to combat it?
Yeah. So I would say the reason that I left PlayStation was largely because of the burnout that I was experiencing. I was crunching quite a bit. We were working about 60-hour weeks. We were working weekends, and I was moving from project to project without a whole lot of a break. And that is just such a fast recipe for burnout. And I know sometimes we need to do this out of necessity, but it is really important that you take time for yourself because work is always going to be there at the end of the day. So one of the things that I like to do is I take a couple of days off every quarter, and I try to plan it in advance. But I'll also, like, if things are slow, I will take a half day. And I also make sure that I have clear boundaries between my work life and my personal life, which can be really hard sometimes if many of your friends are also people that you work with. But having hobbies outside of work, getting a good night's worth of sleep, trying to distance yourself from work during the time that you're not working is really crucial and important.
Thank you. The next question is, do you mostly work from home or from office? And what are the challenges you had to face if you had to work from home or with people who work from home?
Yeah, so I work from home a majority of the time, but I do go into the office occasionally when I feel like I need to do an in-person meeting or something. Working from home has been wonderful. I really enjoy it. All of my coworkers who also work from home, they've noticed like a big increase in their mental health, and also the flexibility they have to just live their daily lives and not stuck in traffic or anything. Some challenges with work from home, especially, are like if you don't have a really stable internet connection, that can be very tricky. Or if you have some kind of, maybe not an emergency, but I live in an apartment complex, so sometimes maintenance needs to come in and do some work. Or sometimes, like if my family is visiting, I can't talk about my work in front of my family because of NDAs. So I will tell them when I have like super secret meetings that I need to take and ask them to take a walk somewhere. But it's definitely something that can be challenging in the beginning, but I feel like the benefits outweigh the challenges, and I'm very pro work from home if you can swing it.
Thank you for your answer. Just a second, sorry.
Yeah.
The next question is, did you have any unusual experiences with your work as a producer? Any unusual roles you had to fulfill?
Oh, wow. That's a really good question. I think there's like an unofficial role that producers play sometimes, which I jokingly call team therapist. So, we're all humans and we never need to apologize for being human or having human emotions. And part of being a producer is creating feelings of, stability on your team and having an open door policy so that they can talk to you. And so sometimes I will have like members of my team come to me with personal problems that they're experiencing, not because they need advice on how to solve them, but because they need somewhere to vent and they realize that it's affecting their work. And then as we're talking, I can help them decide if they need to take time off of work or if there are like other things that we can do to rebalance their workload or whatever to make their personal experience in that moment a little bit better. And I think that is definitely one that people don't talk about enough, but you end up having to rely a lot on your soft skills for that quite a bit. So be prepared. People will come to you with the weirdest things sometimes.
Thank you. The next question is, did you have any technical positions during your game dev career, or was it always more soft skills position?
Yeah, I would say definitely more of like the soft skills position, but we do have technical skills in the sense of like, being able to work through project management software, putting together project plans and roadmaps, doing load capacities and long-term planning and things like that. So it's a different kind of technical skill. But I haven't needed to like go into an engine and code. I haven't had to go in and design anything. Even though like I'll go in and do like play tests and give feedback and stuff like that. So my technical skills rely more on long-term planning and forecasting and like velocity trajectories and stuff like that. Not so much going into the game and editing the code or checking things in and out.
Thank you.
Sometimes I do need to deploy mobile builds for playtesting. So I will go through GitHub and do that and Jenkins. So it's good to know those things, like how to use those programs or at least what their use cases are for. I'm so sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, sorry, I'm the one in the wrong. So the next question is, what was the most interesting game you have worked on and why?
Oh, wow. Honestly, all of them. I really liked them so much. I would say all of the games that I've worked for have had specific challenges and also specific things that made them really cool. Going back to my Death Stranding comments from earlier. So, one of the things that I didn't mention, and this isn't super relevant, but I almost minored in Japanese while I was in school. So, because I had done a martial art and I wanted to be a translator for that martial art. So I had a very like limited working proficiency in Japanese, and our translating staff was understaffed around that time as well, and we were on a really fast turnaround time. So when I was an intern, there were some mornings where we would get in and we would have feedback from Kojima Productions, which was written in Japanese, and we couldn't afford to wait for the translators to get in. So it would be me looking at the feedback along with my friend Henry, who could read Chinese characters. And so I knew the grammar, he knew the Chinese characters, and then we also had Google Translate, and we got like an 80 to 90% accuracy for some things, and then we would send it off to the team and then hope that we were right. And usually we ended up being right, but there were some times where we would give like incorrect feedback and it would delay some things. But that was like an interesting problem space to have.
Oh, that sounds fun. Maybe you have some other experiences you remember where you had to use some other skill not related to your work, but it actually came in useful?
Yeah, I really like doing art, and I'm not very good at it, but I do like doodling and all these things. And so one of the things that I take really seriously when I'm a producer is team health and team morale. And so when I was working on The Last of Us Part 2, we had a team of about 100 people. And like I had mentioned before, we were crunching. It was very technical. We were trying to hit all of our milestones. And of course, this is right before the pandemic hit. And I wanted to give people like collectible things throughout their time on The Last of Us. And so I ended up like during my holidays, I created little postcards featuring all of the characters for every holiday that we had coming up. And then I went to Staples, which is, I don't know if they have that there, but it's a like paper office supply store. I printed them all out on photo paper, and then I hand signed them, and I would drop them off at people's desks so that even like today, they still have those cards up at their desks at their like personal workspaces. And so that was a way I was able to use my existing interest in art as a way to provide something that was really valuable for my team members later on. Also, I like memes. Like I make a lot of memes and I send them to the team. And so if you have like an A+ meme game, like people will respond really positively to that.
Sounds awesome. Maybe you can tell us a bit about your plans for the future. What are your maybe dream projects you want to work on, or dream companies?
Yeah. So right now I am really enjoying my time at Riot Games. It's been really fun. You might have noticed in the news back in January, Riot did experience some layoffs and some team restructuring, which, as I mentioned earlier, seems par for the course considering the last 2 years in game development. My team on Legends of Runeterra just got restructured, and we're going to a much smaller, more leaner team. And so it's about time for me to look for new opportunities. And I'm really excited to say that I'm going to go be a lead gameplay producer on an unannounced R&D title that we're working on at Riot Games. And I'm really excited. I'm super thrilled. The team seems really awesome and high performing. And that's going to be really fun. And also I'm going to have more like speaking engagements coming up soon too. And I'm very excited and thrilled for all of those.
Staying on the topic of layoffs, did you ever have to fire anyone?
I did have to remove somebody. I wasn't their direct manager, but I did provide feedback that led to their being exited from the company. The TLDR is we did have somebody who was a contractor who we learned had lied on his resume. And he had said that he had about 5 years of production experience, and somehow he was able to pass the interviews. And I worked with him for about 3 months, and it became really apparent that he didn't even know what like agile project management was. And he was really ill-suited for the role. And it was really unfortunate because if he had told the truth on his resume, we could have hired him for a much more junior position. But because we had hired him for something a lot more mid-level that needed a lot more autonomy, he just wasn't able to cut it. Don't lie on your resumes.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe you have some advice for people who are just getting into the industry. If they want to work for a big company that makes AAA games, maybe, I don't know if you can talk about this, but what are the companies they should try to apply to? What are the good companies to start in? And maybe about timing, when should you apply to these companies?
Yeah. So that is a tricky question right now, considering the environment that we're all in. So since the beginning of 2023, there's been about 17,000 layoffs across the game development industry. So the market is really saturated. with talent right now. When it comes to what companies to apply it to, like I've liked all the companies that I've worked with. I've liked all the clients that I've worked with. I think you want to take the thing that will be easiest for you to get a foot in the door. So that could be working at like a small indie game startup. That could be just going to game jams and working with people on games that maybe they're not making any money, but you're getting more experience to put on your resume. Could be working on a personal project on the side. I don't think there's ever a good or a bad time to apply for things. But just know in the environment that we're in right now, it is likely to be a little bit trickier, but that doesn't mean that it's impossible. And I definitely recommend, if there are games that you like, one of the things that I tell people that I'm mentoring is make a spreadsheet of all those games and then look at the companies that make those games and then like get in the habit of habitually checking the job boards for those companies. And then maybe you see something that you want to do eventually, but you need to get more experience to do that, and you can use the job description to get guidance in that way.
Thank you on behalf of other people, I guess. Why am I asking you about the time question? Because what I've heard is, I have never actually worked in a big company, but what I've heard is that always a good time to get into a AAA development industry is when you know a game is nearing its release, because that's they need the most people to like just do small patches. I don't know, place barrels on the map. So from your experience, is that true or not?
I would be very careful because usually when companies are doing a really big hiring surge before a game releases, it's usually for contractor roles. And then usually they're not able to sustain all of those roles when a project is released. So what you'll see is as a project is nearing completion, or as it's like in the middle of crunch time, they'll open up a bunch of different contractor roles. People will go in and work those roles, but their contracts will be up when the project is complete or when it hits the shelves. So I don't think it is necessarily the best from like a job security standpoint, but it is something where you can like start getting your foot in the door, making connections, putting a good foot forward. Another thing that I will say that I forgot to mention in my presentation is the games industry. It seems very big, but it's also very small at the same time. So when you are working with people, make sure that you're always putting your best foot forward and that you're not burning any bridges, because you never know when you might need to work with somebody again several years down the road. There have been people I thought I would never work with again who like recently have come back to my company, and it's really exciting and cool because I liked working with them, but I've seen other people get bit from it because they didn't have good relationships with coworkers.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's time to end our lecture. Maybe you have some final words to say to the viewers.
Just thank you so much for having me. It has been a pleasure being here, and I hope everybody has a lovely rest of their day. My day is just starting. It's about 8 a.m., so my work day is starting soon. But I hope you have a great rest of your day and an amazing rest of your conference. Like, this is all for you. Like, go have fun, go meet people, go do fun things, go do great things.
Thank you. Have a great morning, and I hope to see you again, maybe in person next time. And come visit us sometime. And дякую.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.